Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, and before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
So yes, NBA free agency is here, and what a start it was. We did do a live stream on the first night of free agency, so if you wanted to see our initial reactions to a lot of the initial signings that occurred, you can check that out. But day one, by and large, there weren't too many crazy moves. Obviously, we saw teams make some signings and bring in some new guys. You had the Denver Nuggets make a trade, and we'll get to that in a moment. But we're recording this evening or so of day 3 around 7 o'clock. And it was funny because the other day we woke up to, or, got an early notification of a pretty surprising, probably the most surprising move of the offseason. And so we'll start with that one. And that was Myles Turner going to the Milwaukee Bucks in a free agency move where they pulled him from the Pacers, and it was basically a 4-year, $107 million deal. But the fun didn't stop there. The craziness didn't stop there, because in addition to them doing that, they had 2 ways to acquire him, either through a sign and trade, which we thought might initially happen, or by shedding some salary. And so what did they do? They traded Pat Connaughton, course, to move his contract, but they also had to complete it by waiving and stretching Damian Lillard, right? So obviously that was their big acquisition a couple seasons ago, right back in 23. And he was due 2 years, $113 million, but now they're stretching out the contract, so that all that's going to be paid over 5 years. So he'll be a free agent and he'll be free to go wherever he wants to go. Probably won't play for most of this year. Maybe at earliest, some people think he could be back at the All-Star break. We'll see if he, where he goes, because he'll probably sign at some point, even if he doesn't play much this year. But from a Bucks perspective, it was completely unexpected, right? We knew that Brook Lopez was gone, and they did re-sign Bobby Portis, and they did end up re-signing a lot of the other guys who were already on the team: Kevin Porter Jr., Taurean Prince, Jericho Sims, Gary Trent Jr. But the Turner one was surprising, came out of nowhere. Reportedly, the Pacers did not want to pay more than about 25 or so million a year, right? So this kind of came down to money, and the Bucks, I guess, jumped on it. So we'll look at it from the Bucks angle first. They lost Brook Lopez. Now they bring in Myles Turner, right, who I guess is a younger, athletic guy. Not quite as physical as Lopez, right, but he can shoot threes, move out to the perimeter, and can block some shots, right? We saw that in the playoffs. His playoff production dipped as the postseason went on. But, a solid signing for the Bucks. It just feels like, wow, you also had to cut Dame in the process. And is this enough to be able to convince Giannis to stay? That's the part that we don't know. Maybe there are other moves coming. Again, for the Bucks, this one feels like it kind of reeked. Well, I think it is a desperation move to try to keep and hang on to Giannis. But at the very least, you did improve the big man spot, because you probably had to upgrade and move on from Lopez just because of the age. So now at least you got some more guys who can run the floor and give you some more athleticism. But there still has to be more work done to the roster. I don't think this can be the roster and you expect Giannis to stay long term. Maybe he does. But, I don't. It's funny because you look at it and you're thinking, like, why on earth would the Bucks do this, right? Just eat the salary that you used to cut Dame, and now you're basically almost paying like close to $50 million a year. I think like $48 million a year or so for Turner. And like I said, I think it's to try in the hopes to keep Giannis in Milwaukee. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Regardless, if he left, they'd be screwed anyways. So once he's gone, their team really has no real future until they can find a way to draft or acquire someone else again. So I don't really have a problem with it. I'm just curious to see what it looks like, because he won't be playing with Tyrese Halliburton, right? They don't have a real point guard right now in Milwaukee. I guess Giannis, in some ways, is the point guard, point forward, whatever you want to call it. But I do kind of wonder offensively, what does Turner look like without playing, with a solid pick and roll, pick and pop ball handler like Halliburton and some of the other guys in Indiana. So offensively, we'll see what that looks like. But again, I don't blame the Bucks for doing it. I just do kind of wonder, how much better does this make the Bucks? And is this enough to put them in the top tier group of the Eastern Conference? Probably not right now, but at the very least, the East is open. So maybe there's a way if they can make some additional moves, maybe they can be better. So pretty surprising, very shocking. And then from a Pacers perspective, wow, like they were in a game 7 of a finals, very close to potentially winning it all. Then the Halliburton injury basically changes everything, right? Because I know they didn't want to pay, clearly they didn't want to pay Myles Turner and stay in the luxury tax. And some people argue that there are reasons for that. They argue that the defense is not what it used to be. They argue that, in a year without Tyrese Halliburton, is it really worth it? Can you potentially regroup and find another big later on? Is this skill set replaceable? There's not a whole lot of two-way stretch bigs in the NBA, and he's one of them, right? Not the best, but he is one of them. So they must feel like at some point maybe they can replace his production down the line. But I do feel like if you're a Pacers fan, you're probably still very disappointed because you were so close to winning it all, and now you seem further and further away than you've been in a while because of the Halliburton injury. Obviously not his fault. Nothing you can do about that, but it is a reminder of how fast the NBA can change. And I do wonder, what do the Pacers do to pivot? Because as of right now, their options at the 5 aren't really that strong, right? We'll talk about Ayton because about an hour or so before we got on, he signed, and we'll talk about that. But right now, their center depth isn't that great. Again, probably a lost year for them anyways. Like, they could still be potentially maybe like a playoff team in the East just because the bottom part of the East is not that great. But it does feel disappointing. Like I said, I've seen both sides argue for, being okay with letting them go and being mad for having them stay. I just think it's disappointing from a Pacers perspective. And then for the Bucks, good move in terms of the talent. I just don't know how much better they're going to be. But I also understand, like, you at least want to try to see if you can convince Giannis to stay before you just let him go. But, I don't know how successful that's going to be.
Yeah, I've never seen a situation I think like this where
No.
The the winner is also the loser, right? Because I feel like Milwaukee wins in this situation, but they also lose because of the whole Dame situation, right? To be able to even sign Myles Turner, you had to, create that cap, and it's the largest waived and stretched contract in NBA history.
Yeah.
So that's kind of wild, how much salary they are eating in terms of that just to acquire, a good upgraded center, right? And that's the thing, it is an upgraded center. This guy's 10 times better than Brook Lopez at this point in his career. And it's just wild too because Myles Turner has pretty much been in rumors every single year of his career, right? Like for as long as I can remember, it was always Myles Turner tied to the Lakers, Myles Turner tied to somewhere else, right? And now the 1 year where it was rumored that he was going to come back, of course, it's the inverse, and he ends up leaving to Milwaukee. So wild from that perspective too. But I agree with you. I think it's a good move in terms of upgrading that talent at the center position, right? It's amazing. You bring back Portis, and then you obviously have Myles Turner now, and that's pretty good. But like you said, also, does it make you super viable in the Eastern Conference? Maybe not. I mean, I don't know, because you have Kevin Porter Jr., Gary Trent Jr.,
still Kuz,
and Giannis, Myles Turner. I mean, they're always going to be, I guess, in the middle of the pack at the very least because they do have Giannis, but I don't know. It doesn't really make me feel like they elevate above New York, right? I don't think they elevate above Philly when fully healthy.
Right.
So Cleveland, exactly. So I think there's a chance for them to kind of duke it out with maybe, Atlanta, come playoff time, or, later in the season. But I don't know. It is. I don't like it for the Bucks long term, right? Because of the whole Dame situation that is coupled with it. But short term, I don't mind it because, like you talked about, it's a very blatant, obvious talent upgrade.
Yeah, and I guess the question is then, will that be enough to convince Giannis to stay?
No, I think he'll make his decision soon. Probably going to
reportedly August, September, or something like that.
Exactly. I'm sure he'll weigh things because they might not be done. Who knows? They truly might not be done. But I did want to also talk about from the Pacers' perspective. It's wild. That's a long tenured guy, and you kind of just let him walk. I kind of understand why you let him walk, but at the same time, I feel like you could dip into that luxury tax a little bit just to preserve the fact that this team got to the NBA Finals. Like, we already know that they've been able to get here, so why not run it back and see if they can do it again and actually win it this time, you know? So
I guess I guess it'd just be a 2-year wait.
exactly. So it is crazy, but now you can't run it back because he's gone. So that's
Yeah, and
unfortunate.
it's funny because when we did our live stream, we were waiting for a Turner update or some type of notification. Like, we assumed he was going back. We didn't think he was going to leave, but we at least opened the door for, like, well, at some point this has got to come out, right?
Mhm.
Like, maybe there's a sign and trade, but I think we just assumed that he'd come back,
Right.
right? Like, we're not taking a victory lap because we didn't predict he'd go.
Mm-mm.
It's just funny because that was something to think about. That was a red flag where it's like, okay, well, if everybody's so confident about him coming back, where's the update? Where's the notification from Shams or someone else that he's resigned? And clearly, that's what was going on, right? So, I mean, obviously, they clearly didn't want to pay up in order to keep him, right? The Bucks ended up giving him more than what the Pacers were willing to give. I know that there's some conflicting reports, but I believe Shams kind of put out that they didn't offer as much as what the Bucks were willing to offer. So if that's the case, then that's how we get here with the Bucks. It's just like we said. Just the question is it enough to be able to win the East? That's where I think, like I said, you need to do more. I
I
can't
agree.
trust the rest of the group after Giannis to feel confident about them winning the East,
I
in
agree.
my opinion.
I agree.
Even though, like I said, I think Turner can help in different ways. Just like I said, I don't think it's enough. I need to see more if I'm going to be convinced that Giannis will stay. But this probably at least helps somewhat.
Yeah, sure. I would,
Yeah,
yeah, I would say, it probably is a step in the right direction because, like you
yeah.
talked about, it's a talent upgrade, and I think any talent upgrade is going to be, you know, a slight, boost to morale, I guess.
Yeah. Now I guess we might as well talk about the story that happened not long before we got on, and that was DeAndre Ayton. So I think when we last recorded, I don't think at that time he had gotten bought out, right? I
Nope.
think we had no idea that he was going to be on the free agent market. I know, like, we at times, like, and others had talked about the idea of, like, well, maybe somebody trades for him just because there are teams that don't have a center. Maybe somebody's desperate enough to trade for him, bad contract and all. But not at all did we expect him to get bought out. And then he got bought out, and then we were all immediately like, okay, this is a Lakers signing, right? This has the name Lakers all over it,
Yeah.
basically. And what do you know? About an hour or so before we got on, right? Ayton had signed with the Lakers on a 2-year deal worth 16.6 million, with the second year being a player option. So they had the full MLE because Dorian Finney-Smith walked, right? And he ended up going to Houston on a 4-year deal, which we'll get to them momentarily. But they used that MLE to sign initially just Jake LaRavia. And then we were wondering, okay, well, that can't be the only guy that they acquire. It can't just be Jake LaRavia and, nothing else, because that was the only signing at that point.
Hmm.
Then Ayton got bought out. Then we were like, okay, well, now something's going to happen with Ayton. Although I guess he got bought out before free agency opened. Never mind. But either way, we were waiting for the Ayton thing to happen. Actually, Shams, funny enough, had put out later that it was actually more. There were actually way more teams that were interested in him, because initially it was kind of like, okay, Bucks, because this was before Turner, and then Lakers, and then maybe like one other team, I think. Right? It was like, what was it? It was like Golden State,
Hmm.
maybe.
Hmm.
And then he said that not just them, but the Bucks, which we already knew,
Hmm.
but that was before Turner.
Yep.
But also the Clippers, Nuggets, Cavs, Pacers, and Knicks. So all those teams had interest in DeAndre Ayton. Obviously, they weren't able to get him. I think part of that is some of those teams already had a starting center locked in. So he's probably also looking at opportunity, because the Pacers could give him more. It's just without Halliburton, it's not as much of a reason, in my opinion, to go there.
I agree.
Whereas if you go to the Lakers, you can play next to Luka and LeBron, right? Obviously, they've had story. The Lakers have had multiple stories in the last week or so about them. But you go there. Of course, we've talked about him before, right? He's kind of fallen out of favor, I would say, with most NBA fans, right? Like, I think probably the last group of fans was probably right before he got to Portland, right? Because then it was like, okay, maybe he has a bounce back year in Portland and shows everybody something. then that didn't really happen, and then he didn't come to a game because there was snow.
Mhm.
Although I think it was too snowed out, so
Yeah.
maybe that's just
Yeah.
maybe that's an excuse. But either way, um, so we've seen what he can do because obviously we saw when he was in Phoenix, when they went to the finals, he had a great season, he had a great postseason, and was a big part of their success right all the way up, until the finals or whatever. And then after that, remember the Suns didn't even offer him a contract. It was the Pacers who offered him one, and then he accepted that. But the Suns were not really interested in offering him a max for whatever reason, right? Then that's where it kind of seemed like things kind of just started to fall apart. Now, in fairness, in the regular season, he actually was pretty good. And in addition to that, the Suns won 64 games or whatever it was, right? Then the playoffs happen. Then the Suns get demolished in the second round by the Mavs. Then eventually they get Durant. And then that's kind of where the final straw occurs, right? Because then his role is different. He's supposed to kind of be, more of a complimentary guy, which is fine, but he didn't want to do that. Then obviously they trade him to Portland and that big stuff with Beal and Chris Paul and everything else, right? Then eventually plays in Portland, and we just never really hear from him again, essentially, right? And then obviously then this leads to him getting bought out and now joining the Lakers. So he's a guy that's been averaging a double-double. We know offensively, he can score around the basket. He's got good touch in the mid-range area. Not really much of a three-point shooter, but, that's okay. And then defensively, not a great shot blocker, right? More so like I guess I'm big and I can just put my hands up at different spots. I'm not necessarily going to swat a ton of shots back. So not the greatest rim protector. Again, we talked about it. Not the best big that you can, not the best big ideally. And, when you're talking about like Luka and LeBron, it's probably not the most ideal center, but it was the most talented guy. And in this case, you're not trading for him. You're getting him for free. Now, it did, I guess, come at the cost of giving up Dorian Finney-Smith, letting him go to a rival contender. And you also, I guess you'll have to kind of figure out what you do with the rest of the roster because now you do have a center, so the roster's a little bit more balanced, but you still probably want to figure out some other stuff, get some type of wing. Chances are probably that was also holding up some other free agent signings,
Yeah.
right? So maybe after this, we'll see some other guys go to some of these teams, including the Lakers, on minimum contracts. So it helps. I think in theory, on paper, it should help make them better because you have a center who can give you better numbers. It's just a matter of, can he lock in? Can he contribute? Can he be on his best behavior? Can he be good? Because if he's good and he maximizes whatever you can do with them, then that can help them out big time. And it could potentially be a guy where, best case scenario, maybe he's your center long term, right? Because it seemed like they were mostly targeting younger players. He's still only 26. I think he turns 27 within, I don't know, like a month or so.
Yeah, July.
I think the end of the, yeah, exactly, within the month. So July 23rd. So he's still a pretty young guy. And then also, I guess the other concern is the durability because he's had a lot of seasons where he's missed a decent amount of time, including last year. He only played 40 games. Before that, he was at 55. And then before that, 67. But that was what, 2023. So 82 game season, 15 games, not too big of a deal. But there are concerns with him. I don't know him personally, obviously. So, but it's just odd because the Blazers put out some stuff after he got bought out, where they were basically kind of like justifying, this is why we bought him out, fellas, like because of all these other things. So I get all of that. But I do think, again, the teams that were going to want him would be the teams that are the most desperate to acquire a center, and the Lakers would fall into that category, right? It's tough that you kind of have to be on Ayton watch sweepstakes. I suppose if you're a Laker fan, like that's really all you can really do. But, at the very least, like I said, he's a talented player. If he can be the best version of himself, that can help them out. Him alone doesn't do enough. They have to do more. But, this is a start. So chances are we'll see who they get as their backup center. Is it Horford in free agency? Do they just trade for one? Maybe that's more likely. What do you do with some of the guys on the team like Maxi Kleba? Can you find a way to trade him, or does he have to get bought out like some of the other guys? What do you do with Rui? Do you swap him out for a wing? So you have options, but at least you got a center because that was a position of need that they didn't have at all other than Jackson Hayes last season. But now he's a free agent. We don't even know if he's coming back. So before the Ayton signing, they had really no center on the roster at all. Now you got one, and he's a good one. It's just a matter of how good is he going to be. We'll see. But either way, if it doesn't work out here, it's not going to work out anywhere because this is a good opportunity with the passers and playmakers that they have on this team.
Yeah, this is the perfect opportunity, I think, for both parties, right? It's amazing, I think, for the Lakers to be able to grab him, on the MLE. Like that's pretty spectacular, right? This is a former number one pick, and the production can be there for sure. I think, like you said, if he's surrounded by some good passers and playmakers, i.e., LeBron and Luka, yeah, I mean, he should by all means feast, right? Like if you look at it, I mean, realistically, right? Like I think the time when people were kind of high on him was like you said when he did get moved, to Portland the first year, and he was like averaging like what 21 and 10 or something like that. So that's fine. But then last year I think is where people were like, okay, he might be washed completely. But look at the roster of Portland, right? Like that was not an offensive team by any means. They don't really have a hub or anything like that. So I think playing with Luka and LeBron as well, I think it'll make him look better for sure. And I think as long as he gives you a solid, efficient double and isn't a liability on defense, they're fine. Like you said, get some more depth as well. Maybe at some other spots like wing or center, but I think kind of sacrificing Dorian Finney-Smith for DeAndre Ayton is a win in my book. I know.
I guess and Laravia.
And, yeah, exactly. And you bring in Laravia as well, and I think that's a good flyer in terms of youth, right? Like Dorian Finney-Smith is a little older than Laravia, but I think Laravia is younger, and he kind of fits probably the Luka timeline a little bit more than the LeBron timeline. But bringing in a guy like DeAndre Ayton I think is perfect, right? 26, 27 years old. And like I said, as long as he gives you a clean double-double and isn't, a cone on defense, I think you'll be okay.
Yeah, and if you want to get into some more specific stuff like pick and roll, that should help now because now you actually have a legitimate roller.
Yeah.
Because before that, Jackson Hayes, really good athlete, but not very physical,
not touch.
Very strong. Yeah, not great touch. So it's kind of like if he doesn't have like a good lane to finish and dunk, he's probably not going to make it. Even though, again, he was an efficient guy, 70% from the field as a starter for LA, but, it's all dunks.
Exactly.
And shots around the basket. Ayton's got a lot more skill than that. Rebounding, too, right? Because, again, as we said, this is a guy that's averaged double-digit rebounds his career. Every year's gotten at least 3 offensive boards a game, I think, except for, a couple of seasons in Phoenix. But either way, so rebounding and, touch more shots around the rim, I think is helpful because one of the issues that we did see with the Lakers offensively is they did offensively modernize a little bit and take more threes, especially once they got Luka, but you didn't really have a lot of rim attacks and rim pressure, right? Outside of like LeBron and I guess occasionally Rui, because even Luka didn't get to the rim quite as much as a Laker. Maybe some of that's the injuries, but I think that'll help, and hopefully it'll help Austin too. That's another pick and roll guy. So again, maybe some of that's just kind of copium, whatever you want to call it. But either way, it's better than what they had. And hopefully, there's other moves on the way if you're the Lakers, right? Like I said, I don't think this can be the only move. Again, backup center, potential wing, replacement backup guard that can help defend, stuff like that. They may not be able to do all of it, but that would at least help. But, I need to see more before I can kind of officially crown them or clown them for whatever you call their offseason, right? Like right now it's incomplete, but at the very least the Ayton signing is a good signing that does at least in some cases help make up for losing Dorian Finney-Smith and Laravia, like you mentioned, a young guy, a forward that can shoot, score, decent athlete, maybe defends a little bit, so we'll see what he can do. But either way, that's significant because again, nobody expected him to be on the market. We were talking about, is it Clint Capella? Is it Brook Lopez, right? Is it, Al Horford maybe as a starting center? Or bring back Jackson Hayes even, something like that. But you don't have to worry about that as much now. And now you can just kind of focus on the other margins of the roster and kind of go from there.
Yep.
So now I guess we should get into some of the other teams that made massive moves or big moves in free agency. We should start with Houston, I guess. We might as well start with them and kind of talk about the moves they made because I think they did a really good job in terms of the players that they acquired. Obviously, they got Kevin Durant through trade, right? We know that deal, right? Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, and picks, or the 10th pick or whatever. Maybe the deal gets expanded. It is official on July 6th, right? So it's not completely through yet, but maybe something else slips through the cracks. I don't know. But basically, they re-signed Jeff Green, Aaron Holiday, Jay Sean Tate, but then they also re-signed Fred VanVleet, but they also brought in Dorian Finney-Smith on a 4-year deal. They took him from the Lakers, 4 years, $53 million. And then they also, I think, surprisingly, because there were reports that Dorian Finney-Smith was probably going to go to Houston. There were reports from several people, including Anthony Irwin and Zach Lowe and others, right, that the negotiations for the Lakers for Dorian Finney-Smith went pretty poorly, and he was not very happy with how they handled it. So he went to Houston on a 4-year deal. I don't think the Lakers were ever going to give him a 4-year deal, so that's probably part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also, like I said, shockingly brought in Clint Capella. Nobody had this one coming, where that's another center that you grab in free agency to already go with Steven Adams, and of course the starting center, one of the stars, Alperen Sengun. So I love pretty much everything that they've done so far in the offseason, because now you have a guy in Kevin Durant, again, not quite the same player that he once was, but still really good, right? And still more than capable of giving you some great offensive production every night when he's available. And then that kind of helps solve some of your late game scoring issues, right? Because before last year, you had to basically hope and pray that Jalen Green or Fred VanVleet could get it done in crunch time, which not an ideal spot to be in, right? Because other than that, the only other option is Sengun, right? And, he's gotten better every year, but he's still probably not quite what you want to go to late in games against every team. And sometimes it's hard as a center to be the go-to guy offensively, right? Like, aside from Jokic, right, and maybe a couple others, right, you don't see a lot of teams play through their center at the end of games, right? Not too many teams, their center is their best player anyways. But either way, now you don't have to worry about that because you got Durant. With Dorian Finney-Smith, you got a 3-and-D wing to add on to the wings that they already have. And then Clint Capella is another big to add on to the bigs they already have. So you have a ton of optionality now. You can have super big lineups like they've already done, right? They can continue to do the double big lineup, but they can do double big lineups with different bigs. You could have Adams and Sengun. I guess you could have Capella and Sengun, or Capella and Adams if they choose to do so. And then you can even have these centerless lineups where you still have a lot of length and size. It's just, you don't have a big out there. So you could have Durant at center with all those other forwards like Eason, Jabari Smith Jr., Dorian Finney-Smith, and everyone else. And, you still have Fred VanVleet as a point guard. So they're in a really good spot, right? Like, they're in a great spot to be one of the prime contenders in the Western Conference. Because last year, I think you kind of pegged them in as a team where it's like they were a really good regular season team. Maybe they win a playoff series if they get the right matchup. But now this is an actual contender where now they can challenge in the Western Conference, maybe get to the conference finals, maybe get to the NBA finals if things go their way. They wouldn't be the favorites, but they're up there. They, in theory, should be one of the 3 best teams in the Western Conference right now, because now you got your franchise superstar guy in Kevin Durant, even though he's older. Then you have the other young supporting cast guys, right? I need to see Amen Thompson continue to make a leap to feel even better about them. But again, he's young, so he should get better. Then even Jabari Smith Jr., you were able to keep him and re-sign him because we talked about the Durant trade. You didn't have to give up any of your other prized young assets, right? No Thompson, no Smith, no Sengun, no Reed Shepherd, no Cam Whitmore. So they still have the flexibility to make other moves. Maybe in the future, maybe they take some of these guys and turn it into Giannis in a couple seasons. Who knows? Maybe that happens. But at least as of right now, they're set. They did a great job. Easily one of the best teams that we've seen in terms of making moves this free agency. They're poised to try to win right now, and we'll see what they'll be able to do.
Yeah, for sure. I think, they had arguably the best offseason, so far, right? And I think it obviously, like you said, starts with KD, but round of applause for them, for the free agent signings, right? Like Clint Capella, kind of just sniping him out of nowhere. Dorian Finney-Smith, stealing him from the Lakers as well. And these are kind of positions of need, right? And, you add on a ton of wing depth with Dorian Finney-Smith. He's going to be able to hit knockdown threes and also fits your identity, right? He's going to be, defensive-minded kind of guy. And then Clint Capella, right? You're doubling down on the double big lineup, right? He's going to do similar things as Steven Adams, right? And, say Steven Adams misses time. All right, Clint Capella, next man up, right? So I think, they've stockpiled a ton of depth. They were deep last year. and they're going to be deep again, right? You bring back Fred VanVleet on a team-friendly deal, so he'll still be there, commanding the one. And then, yeah, like you said, it's kind of just, the missing puzzle piece, I guess, in theory, on paper, would be Kevin Durant. You got your go-to guy, and you got your offensive firepower. So I love Houston and what they've done, and shout out to them for having a great free agency so far.
Yeah, because again, also Durant can be a plug and play guy, and he can shoot. Because that's the other thing. Houston was not a very good 3-point shooting team last year. Now, in fairness, they didn't take a lot of them, so it didn't hurt them as much. But now their offense, in my opinion, should be much better without sacrificing too much defensively. Because it's Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks that's being sent out. Brooks is a really good defender, but either way, I think that the trade-off is worth it. The talent level is just, that's too much to say no. And that's kind of the ideal spot in terms of, we talked about it for Durant. This was, if you were picking a team that you would have wanted him to get traded to, this would have been the ideal one, because a lot of the other teams have other question marks. Maybe you could say you like Minnesota, but what's the package, right? And then how different is the team going to look? Would they have to give up one of their bigs? Would they have to give up McDaniels? But for Houston, it's easy to fit him in there because you gave up guys that we knew. We knew the moment Jalen Green signed that contract, he was not going to be a Rocket long term, and now he's not, right? He's going to be in Phoenix with Devin Booker, and all those other guys. So, like I said, for Houston, they kind of solved a lot of the issues that they had. Maybe you'd like to see them add like another, I don't know, 3-and-D guard, maybe, but you can also insert Reed Shepherd or Cam Whitmore into that rotation. Not that they're considered quote unquote 3-and-D guys, but they should in theory get more minutes unless one of them gets traded, and then we can see what they can do, and that can add some more youth and depth to their rotation. So their roster is pretty much set, and they still have a decent amount of flexibility too, because they were able to use the MLE, I think, for both Finney-Smith and Capella, I think Capella was a sign and trade. Finney-Smith they used for the MLE, I'm pretty sure, but either way they did, like I said, anything and everything that you could have asked for. So they did a great job, and like you said, they probably had the best offseason of any of these other teams.
Yeah,
sure. I mean, of course, like you said, the other teams, and we'll get into those, they did a great job as well. Where would you rank Houston I guess, or maybe should we save that until we go through maybe another team that also made some moves in free agency? You think we should hold on?
Yeah, we can hold on for a little bit.
All right, so we'll also move on to the Denver Nuggets then, who also were another Western Conference team that had a pretty significant free agency, and they kicked it off on day one by making a pretty shocking, surprising trade for Cam Johnson, right? Where Michael Porter Jr. And an unprotected 2032 first-round pick were traded to the Brooklyn Nets in exchange for Cam Johnson, right? Obviously, the Nets forward, right, who used to play for Phoenix, right, who had been in trade rumors a ton. Once upon a time, he was actually supposed to potentially be the marquee guy that was going to be moved at that last trade deadline. That ended up not happening. We had way bigger trades than that. But either way, he finally gets moved from Brooklyn and gets to go to a contender. I'm sure he's excited about that. In fact, I think I saw a clip of him talking about that he was extremely hyped about it, with the chance to compete and contend. I mean, stats-wise, we talked about it. I would say that Michael Porter Jr. is the better player. He's actually been more durable recently than Cam Johnson, because Cam Johnson in recent years, 57 games, 58 games, and then 42 games in 2023. So he's had a problem in recent years staying healthy. But, we also say that Michael Porter Jr.'s ceiling is higher because he has those explosive offensive games where he's 6'10 with long arms and just can't miss. But Cam Johnson can still play. He's still good. He put up 19 a game last year, 39 from three. So that'll help, right? In terms of 3-point attempts a game, he was at 7 attempts a game. So that'll help continue to have Denver's 3-point attempts continue to stay where they are. But either way, he also has a little bit more on-ball chops, right? Not a guy that you necessarily want handling the ball a ton, but he was able to make some plays, attack some closeouts, which I think Porter's a little bit less comfortable doing. So that can probably help make their offense a little bit trickier to figure out. And then also in free agency, they also brought back Bruce Brown, who was on their championship team, right? He's back on a minimum deal. And then they also brought in Tim Hardaway Jr. on a minimum contract. So I think Denver did a really good job this offseason. They were already a good team, but now you've added some more depth, with the two guys off the bench. I think they still have their MLE, which they haven't used yet, so we'll see what they do. Also forgot to mention, they traded for Jonas Valanciunas, and they were only had to give up Dario Saric. I don't know what the Kings are doing, but either way,
You're right.
so you add a backup big, you add two guys off the bench, one guy who's a 3-point shooter, and the other guy who's like a utility role player who fit really well next to Jokic. And you brought in Cam Johnson, right? And Cam Johnson, his contract is cheaper than Michael Porter Jr., so you save some money. He is a little bit older than Michael Porter Jr., but it's not like he's old. So, again, like when you look at what they did a really good job too, because they needed to add depth. They needed to add some additional pieces, and they were able to do it. And we said the only way they were probably going to do it is by trading Michael Porter Jr., and they did. They just got a new GM, I guess the interim GM or whatever, not that long ago, and he immediately put in work and I think helped make the team better.
Yeah, shout out to them for actually pulling the trigger on a move like this because it was kind of the first domino to fall, right? It freed up a ton of money. It freed up a ton of space in terms of, who you can bring in, versatility, right? You bring back Bruce Brown, a guy who was a part of your championship formula. Cool. You bring in a guy like Cam Johnson, who I think, has winning tendencies, right? Definitely more of a, I think, team player than Michael Porter Jr. A little bit more versatile as well, right? But like you said, Michael Porter Jr. probably the talent level is probably higher, but I think you like Cam Johnson on the Nuggets a little bit more in terms of a fit. And yeah, bringing in Valanciunas as a backup big is phenomenal as well. So we'll actually get, a good center, that can back up Jokic as well. And, you have internal development over there as well. So, the key for Denver was never really, the high end talent. That was never the question. It was always the depth. And I think the fact that they're deeper for sure makes them one of the more dangerous teams in the Western Conference again.
Yeah, exactly. And that's going to be a big thing for them is that, again, Daron Holmes too, right? Because he didn't play last year because he tore his Achilles. So now you have a backup big rotation of Valanciunas and Holmes. I don't know how much Holmes will play whenever he comes back from his Achilles. And then, like I said, you have a real shooter off the bench, a veteran guy in Tim Hardaway Jr., Bruce Brown. So I like this team a lot more because their issue really was the starting five was fine. It's just the issue is you didn't have enough depth. And I think Cam Johnson isn't that much different or isn't that much of a talent difference from Michael Porter Jr. that you're going to miss it too much. But I think you'll value the addition of the extra guys, the extra bodies that can help them out over the course of the season, and guys who can play. So that helps too. They're not just guys that are at the end of the bench. They're actual guys that, hey, Tim Hardaway Jr. can have a random night in February where he gets hot and hits 6-7 threes in a game that can swing it. Or Bruce Brown can make some big plays on both ends of the floor, right? Because we saw him fit in with Jokic in a really versatile, well-rounded way, right? Screener, roller, extra ball handler. Not a great three-point shooter, but, that's okay because he can do a bunch of other stuff too. And you still have Christian Brown, who I'm going to assume at some point they'll extend and keep. And then you try to see what you figure out with everyone else, right? Like Peyton Watson, right? He'll probably be re-signed or extended or whatever. And if not, he'll still be there as an extra wing. I don't know. Can we expect the other young guys? Can we expect anything from Pickett? Can we expect anything from Tyson or any of the other guys? Probably not. But it's okay because, again, you're not as reliant on those guys now. So I think that now they are set where I think they can realistically, challenge a team like Oklahoma City or Houston. Again, they're not going to be the favorites. But at the very least, you feel much better about them, I would say, if you're a Nuggets fan than you did before. Even though, again, the changes probably aren't quite as drastic as Houston. But in totality, they're still really good, and it's hard to argue that they're not better. Like, I would say they are better. And again, that's the main thing that they needed because their infrastructure as a whole with the starting group was fine. Just could you make moves around the margins? But they did that and some because clearly MPJ is not a marginal move if you're going to trade him. That's one of your starters.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll talk. Yeah, so we can talk about those two teams, and I guess we also might as well talk about the other team, although we have to move over to the Eastern Conference that made a splash in free agency by making a bunch of moves, and that was the Atlanta Hawks, right? The fun didn't stop in the draft, right? But they were also able to bring in Nickeil Alexander-Walker. They were able to bring in Luke Kennard. Obviously, they took Nickeil Alexander from the Wolves, right? So they gave him a 4-year deal, $62 million. They were able to absorb him, I believe, in a sign and trade right? I think all they just gave up was like a second or whatever. So didn't really have to do much there to acquire another rotational piece, right? And apparently Trae Young was pretty big on recruiting these guys. So they brought in those two players in addition to what they already did in the draft, which we talked about in our last draft, in our last episode or the episode before, talking
Mhm.
about the draft.
Mhm.
So they did all that. And then they still have Trae Young, still have Dyson Daniels, still have Jalen Johnson, Reese Shea, and now they brought in Porzingis. They still have a Kungwu with these other guys. So this is another team, at least in the Eastern Conference, that now you have to actually look at as a real threat, a real challenge for teams in the Eastern Conference. Because we saw, the last time the Hawks were able to make a deep run, we've seen what Trae Young could do with a good roster. And now this is, I think, a very optimized roster for him because, he's a small guard, not great defensively, though he's gotten better. But now you have a bunch of long, athletic, two-way players to balance everything out and protect him defensively. Porzingis, if he's healthy, can add some size, add some versatility to go with the Kungwu. And then on top of that, Trae Young himself offensively has evolved somewhat, right? He's a lot more comfortable playing off the ball. Still not his go-to, but he's a lot better doing it. So this roster, I think also you have to put somewhere towards the top of the Eastern Conference, just because of the fact that I think they were, when we saw them when they were healthy, they were really good. Then Johnson gets hurt with his shoulder, and we never really hear from the Hawks again. I mean, I guess they had a couple stretches, but they weren't very good once he got out because they couldn't defend worth anything. Then they got embarrassed out of the play-in by the Magic and then by the Miami Heat in overtime. So that was pretty brutal. A tough way for things to end. But it's okay. Then they were able to swindle the Pelicans, right, where they were able to get that extra first from New Orleans in exchange for the rights for the New Orleans to take Derek McQueen. So I like what they did. I think this is going to be a really good team, and they may be one of those dark horse in the wings teams, kind of waiting to sneak up on you, like the Pacers next
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, for sure. I think they're super underrated. I think I saw a stat earlier. Trae Young is the only player on that team that is under 6'5". That's kind of crazy. So they
Yeah,
truly have surrounded him with some real talent, right? And, I think Jalen Johnson, he's the second coming of John Collins, if not better, right? So we already know how that duo, panned out. And, when they were healthy, it was pretty good. So, yeah, I mean, I think the future is super bright for Atlanta. And like you said, turning, getting Nikhil Alexander-Walker, that's awesome. You get Porzingis as well. So they had a home run offseason for sure. And I think they've jumped up quite a few spots on the ladder.
yeah, it's pretty much hard to hate anything
Yeah.
that they did, and it's crazy because I think it was a year ago we were all super low on Atlanta because they made the Murray move. I think most people liked it at the time, but the problem a lot of people had was they didn't like the fact that they gave up a lot of unprotected picks. Then the worst case scenario happens where it doesn't work, it doesn't look good, but they were able to, in fairness, pivot off of it, and they were able to bounce back and put together a roster now that is really good. Like, we'll see what they can do, but this could potentially be the best Atlanta Hawks team that we've had in a while, right? That you've had in a while. Because I know they went to the conference finals in 2021. That run seemed like, I think to most people, especially looking back, felt a little bit fluky. This one feels more like, we shouldn't be shocked if the Hawks are able to win multiple playoff rounds. Is again, especially in the Eastern Conference when the Celtics aren't going to be great this year, and then who the heck knows with Indiana? I mean, Indiana's probably not going to be good enough this year, and then on top of that, I mean, can Philly? I mean, is a question mark because I don't know if I can trust them to be healthy. Still no words on Quentin Grimes. Nothing's happened there yet, interestingly enough. But either way, the Hawks, if they're healthy, that's a team where, again, I'm not a betting guy, but that's a team where if they, whatever their over under is, I'd consider taking the over because I think they're going to be really good. And maybe they end up disappointing us again because it feels like that does happen every year. But in fairness, they were better than what we thought because last year we thought they'd be not very good.
Yeah.
And then they
you're
ended
right.
up, before the injuries, looking like a good team. They
Okay.
finished not very good, but it's okay because, again, I think they'll be better this year. All the guys that they drafted and have acquired in terms of the young guys so far have panned out. And then the guys that didn't work out, it's whatever. Like, enough of them hit so that way, like, you shouldn't feel upset about Kobe Buffkin so far not really panning out because Dyson Daniels was most improved. Looks like he's going to be an absolute two-way monster. And then Jalen Johnson, who I think most people already liked anyways, looks like as long as he's healthy, he's going to be more than worthy of that contract they gave him. And Risa Shea, right, where everybody kind of felt like, this guy's a mid guy, right, a mediocre number one pick. But he showed some real quality signs last year and looks like he's going to be a good player. Like for them, that was a really good pick, and it just so happened to work out for them, right? I guess they rigged the lottery to give the Hawks the number one pick, and it ended up being, something that helps them out, I guess, 'cause
Yeah.
that seems like what happens every year. So,
Right, right.
good job, Adam Silver, on that one. But either way, they're another one of the big winners, I would say, of the offseason.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I guess, if we want to continue to look around, the most of the rest of the teams more so was kind of just like I said, either re-signings or movements of guys that are like kind of in the middle tier. Because I think we talked about some of them already, like D'Lo. He went to Dallas over from Brooklyn, but there were some other guys. So the Grizzlies ended up re-signing Santi Aldama. Right, they're going to re-sign Jaren Jackson Jr. And I believe it was like a renegotiate thing, right, where they're going to renegotiate his contract and extend him to like 250 million. That's a lot of money. But I guess they're just like, hey, what's the alternative? Not pay him? The answer is
Right.
really no there. I think they still have to move Cole Anthony, if I'm not mistaken, but they don't have to do it yet. But they've also agreed to bring in Ty Jerome as a backup point guard. They took him from Cleveland, right, who ended up bringing in Lonzo Ball, I guess, as a replacement. So, like that for Memphis. I guess, if you want, you can talk about it more, but probably not too much because, some of these other signings we should probably go through as well.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know,
I like it from Memphis's perspective, right? You get a sense of stability, right? You already had Scottie Pippen Jr. and you get more depth. So, yeah, I have no problem with them adding on a guy like Ty Jerome because we already know he's gonna, give you a good regular season for sure.
Yeah. Then, and again, I don't think we're going to go over every single signing. Some of these are going to be just teams roped into it as well, just so that way we can kind of group them all together. But the Detroit Pistons, they brought in Karis LeVert on a 2-year deal. They re-signed Paul Reed, and they also actually acquired Duncan Robinson in a sign and trade where they sent Simone Fontecchio over to the Miami Heat. So Robinson's no longer a Miami Heat anymore. And it seemed like the reporting was Beasley, once he had his gambling investigation going on, he was actually initially on track to get a 3-year deal, but of course that's on hold and I don't think can happen anymore anyways, right? But
Yeah.
that's okay because you got Karis LeVert, you got Duncan Robinson, and I guess Robinson in essence, right, could be a Beasley replacement. They're similar types of players. I think Robinson has now become a little bit more comfortable attacking off of screens, right? Whereas like before, threes and nothing else,
Yep.
right? And now he can actually do a little bit more in that Miami offense. I think, Beasley is not quite as adept at that. I don't think. And again, they're in a similar tier of players, but LeVert, backup scorer off the bench, right? Atlanta let him go because they wanted to have Nikhil Alexander Walker. No complaints there. And there was a weird Detroit story initially they were about how the Kings were gonna trade Malik Monk to Detroit in order to acquire Dennis Schroeder in a sign and trade, which would have been very bizarre. But that ended up not happening, and the Kings ended up acquiring Dennis Schroeder on his own. There was no sign and trade. But what did you think of those moves?
Yeah, I like what Detroit did, right? The Malik Beasley thing sucks, right? But you get a scorer, you get, Karis LeVert, who I think will give you, a ton of scoring potential off the bench, and you get Duncan Robinson, who will replace, a little bit of what Malik Beasley, did, right? He's gonna be a knockdown shooter, guaranteed, and yeah, just keep surrounding Cade with some legit shooters and veterans. And Duncan Robinson has experience, going to the finals, so I like it.
Yeah. And I gotta ask, what is the Kings' plan here? Because Dennis Schroeder, they potentially could have signed Russ, right? I think had they done the Schroeder sign and trade with Malik Monk, they would have brought in both him and Westbrook. Westbrook, I think they're saying is probably not likely to go to the Kings right now, so I
Mhm.
guess he's just kind of on hold. I don't know where he goes, but I just don't quite understand what the Kings are doing. Like, I mean, I guess I liked them buying into the draft and drafting who they took, Neek Clifford, but still either way, like I'm confused as to what the direction and what the purpose of this team is supposed to be. Like, what am I looking at?
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like a incomplete art project, right? And not a good one. Very, very weird. I'm not really sure what's going on there. You have a hodgepodge of guys, a group of guys that I don't think will be able to make a lot of noise at all. I think this will be a bottoming team. They got to move on from somebody. If I was the Kings, I would just blow it up again. I mean, like, and I'm not saying like I don't know. You got to move on from like DeRozan and Zach LaVine. I just don't think that those two guys are going to be able to, get you where you want to be. Like maybe you could try and build around Sabonis, but my stock on Sabonis is like tanked completely. So I'm not super high on him anymore. But at the very least, the Kings did get a point guard, but I don't know. It's still a very weird situation because how is that team going to function and work, right?
I don't know, and I'm curious to see if they do anything else. Then you had the Dallas Mavericks. So I did mention that they re-signed, so now they've drafted Cooper Flag, they've signed D'Angelo Russell, they've signed Kyrie Irving, or re-signed Kyrie Irving. So now I'm kind of curious as to, for the Mavs, what could they actually be? Like, what could they look like next season? Because you got those guards. You're going to be without Kyrie Irving for at least most of next year. I don't know exactly when he comes back, but maybe it could be a January return. I don't know. But you do have D'Angelo Russell as a stopgap. Then when Kyrie comes back, you can move D'Lo to the bench, and then he can play either with or without Kyrie, because we've seen him do that with other guards and other ball handlers. We saw him do it in LA with the Lakers. But you have that. They re-signed Daniel Gafford to an extension, and obviously they drafted Cooper Flag. I guess we can talk about the Western Conference a little bit, but because we kind of feel like right now Oklahoma City's still the cream of the crop. Houston's moved up to one of the top 3 spots. Denver's still hanging around. And then I guess whoever else you feel like after that. But where is Dallas? Because on paper, there you could at least squint and talk yourself into the idea that this could be a good team. I don't know if you can say, you probably can't call it. I don't think you can feel confident about it being a championship team, but you could at least make the case like, hey, if Cooper Flag is good out of the gates, if AD is healthy, if Kyrie comes back and is mostly himself, and some of the other guys like Klay Thompson, like Max Christie, and all these other guys work out. I believe they recently re-signed Dante Exum. That was earlier today. We're recording this on Wednesday. But how good can that team be? Because, if can they win 50 games? Because that's probably where they're going to have to be or close to it in order to not be a play-in team again.
Yeah, I think if Kyrie was fully healthy, I would automatically say yes. But they could be right under it and win like 48, right? Like that wouldn't surprise me. Bringing in a guy like Cooper Flag, that's amazing. He's going to fit right in, defensively with what they want to do, the scheme, all that stuff. Anthony Davis, he has to be fully healthy as well. I think D'Lo, that's a good addition in terms of, like you said, a guy to kind of just keep them afloat at the point guard position until Kyrie does come back. And hopefully, he looks pretty good. But, it wouldn't surprise me if they win like a little under 50 games. I think 50 games might be a little ambitious, right? Like I think 47, 48 would be more of a more realistic ballpark.
Yeah, because that's the question. Because I think if you don't win close to 50 games, then that's a play-in team. At least this past season, right? I think the Clippers were the 5 seed, and they won 50 games. Then you had the 6-seeded Wolves. I think they won 49. Then the Warriors were a play-in team at 48, and the Grizzlies were 8 at 48. So that would be the question. But like you said, because we don't know that Kyrie's coming back, it's a little bit hard to put them in the upper tier. But if he comes back quickly and is himself, and Flag is really good out of the gates, like that could be a playoff team. Like I said, I don't feel like offensively there's enough perimeter stuff there for me to feel great about them being able to win multiple playoff rounds, but they do have size, they do have length, and they're at least, I think, an intriguing team to look at. I'm not but like I said, I'm not quite ready to get to the point of, oh yeah, they're able to contend right now, because I think that there's still probably a tier under that, but who knows? Maybe I'm underrating the roster too much.
No, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. Then some other moves I guess we can look at. Tyus Jones to the Orlando Magic as a backup point guard, right? To add some extra offensive production off the bench, a guy who can, help be somewhat of a floor general spark plug guy. So that's, I think, a solid signing. Luke Cornett going to the Spurs for 4 years and $41 million. We didn't really have a lot of 4-year signings outside of him and Dorian Finney-Smith and I guess Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I guess you could count Myles Turner as well. But that's a guy, a backup big that they were able to poach from Boston. Can block shots, can roll to the rim, short roll guy, a decent backup big, can sometimes start in a pinch. But now if you look at Boston, Cornette's gone, Porzingis is gone, and Horford's still up in the air. We don't know where he's going to go. A lot of people think he's going to go to Golden State, but we don't know as of right now. He still hasn't decided. He could just retire, potentially. Or maybe some people think he might go back. I don't think he goes back to Boston. My guess is he would probably leave and go elsewhere and try to maybe contend and win one last time, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, with the Celtics, now it's kind of hard to, say that they're going to be really good next year. Now, and we already knew that they wouldn't be. But, what did they do? Brought in Josh Minott from Minnesota. Also brought in Luka Garza, from Minnesota as well. So 2 former Wolves players. But more specifically, what did you think of the signings of Tyus Jones, Luke Cornett, and some of those other kind of margin signings?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really hate on it, right? With the Magic, I think it's great. I think the funny thing is, I think that was rumored to happen last year or something like that.
I think so.
Yeah,
it ended up being the Suns, but I think the Magic were another team.
exactly. So it's kind of good to see that come to fruition. I think Boston, getting Luka Garza, that's okay. But like you said, Tyus Jones going to the Magic for 1 year is pretty special. I think that gives you a calming presence for sure off the bench, right? And you have your backcourt is kind of interesting there. You have Anthony Black as well, so that's pretty cool. I don't mind that. I think the Luke Kennard one is good. Yeah, but I mean, along the margins, I think this was a good free agency. I think a lot of teams got their money's worth for these guys, right? Like there weren't a ton of overpays or anything like that. No, true surprises. And I think, it's good. I liked a lot of the signings that retained guys, and I definitely like, the ones that kind of showed, or give guys new situations. So you can't really be mad at any of them.
Yeah. Now, you did also have a couple of re-signings, like Jakob Poeltl was re-signed to a 4-year, $104 million extension. Interesting. I mean, for a while he was kind of $20 million a year. I think that's a little bit of a raise, but I guess for Toronto, no real other options at the 5, honestly. So I guess not much of a problem with that. They brought in Mamukelashvili from the Spurs, right? So he's gonna, I guess, be their backup center. Chris Boucher is a free agent, so I don't know where he goes,
Right.
if anywhere, right? He could be like an okay backup stretch big or whatever. But then we had a couple of weird signings, right? Ones where I'm a little bit confused, right? And one of them was Kevon Looney going to the New Orleans Pelicans for 2 years and $16 million. Again, not at all a bad player, respected guy, a long time. I mean, he had played for the Warriors his whole career, won multiple titles with them. Maybe a guy that gets his jersey retired. I think everybody loves him there. And maybe it's a locker room guy, but I'm a little confused just because from New Orleans, you traded an unprotected first to get Derek Queen, or to trade up to get Derek Queen. You drafted Jeremiah Fears. You also traded for Jordan Poole. But then, in addition to taking Derek Queen, and you already had Yves Missi, then you also signed Kevon Looney. So what are you going to do with all those guys? I mean, I guess, now we're seeing some of these teams load up on bigs, but that one was just kind of confusing. That was one of the most, I don't know what to even make of this one, signings of free agency. Like, again, not even a bad player. I'm just confused as to why here. Like, what was the point of New Orleans offering him $8 million a year to come down there? Maybe it could just be, again, a veteran signing. So that could be it. And that's probably, and maybe that is what it is. If that's not what it is, then that's kind of odd to me.
I think it's a quality vet signing that gives you a little bit of versatility. I'm sure everybody saw, a lot of success of the double big throughout the regular season and a little bit in the postseason. Everybody kind of wants to have their version of that, right? But I think from New Orleans' perspective, they might not feel comfortable, leaning on Yves Missy and Derek
Sure.
Queen because they are very young, right? That's a second and first year player. So maybe you bring in Kevon Looney for some stability. But I agree with you. I think he could have gone somewhere else and I would have been much happier. I think the New Orleans situation is kind of odd, but at least he's reunited with JP, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's good. And then the Hornets, I was a little confused by, only because they traded Nurkic for Colin Sexton. Okay, that's fine. No real issues with that. You brought in a backup guard. And then I was like, okay, well maybe that means that Trey Mann, maybe they just don't bring back because you got Sexton. But no, they re-signed him. 3 years, $24 million, only $8 million a year. Not much of a problem. And then they also brought in Spencer Dinwiddie. So now they have 1,000 guards. So what does that mean for Charlotte, from Charlotte's perspective? And they also, in terms of centers, brought in Mason Plumlee. So in terms of centers, they don't really have great options at the five. So I'm kind of confused as to what the plan and what the goal is here. I don't quite know what they're doing. Maybe it's just LaMelo Ball insurance because he seemingly misses a lot of time. But this feels like it might be overkill, in addition to some of the other guards who were already on the roster, right? Like, what was it, like Nick Williams or whatever? I mean,
Yeah.
that they drafted a couple of seasons ago. I'm just kind of confused as to what's going on here.
Yeah, I don't know. It is kind of weird.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's weird. Like you said.
Yeah, I was like, I thought maybe you might have had an answer for me. Because at least the Looney one I can at least understand, like you said, from the perspective of a veteran guy. And I know Dinwiddie's a veteran guy. I'm just confused as to why they have so many guards. I mean,
Yeah,
like I
because
don't.
they re-signed Trey Mann. They
Yeah,
like you brought in Dinwiddie on top of everything else that you did. Traded for Colin Sexton. I mean, I don't know. That's another one where I'm very confused. That's too many guards. That's like what, 5 or 6 now.
hmm
And I don't know. And I actually liked what they were doing, in the draft. I was like, yes, get
yeah,
talent that will make an immediate impact. And it's like, you don't really have to worry about the potential and upside, down the line. Like these guys are going to be good off rip. But now I'm like, what are you guys doing? This is a complete 180 from the draft approach. I don't know. It's mind boggling, to be honest. So I don't know. Maybe they're trying to package some of these guys up, but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know. I just can't see that happening. It's weird.
Hello ball trade.
I mean, maybe maybe this is like their contingency plan, right? Maybe Melo goes down. Like maybe they know that that's going to happen, and then they just have a bunch of guys stockpiled just in case other dominoes start falling. I don't know. It's still a horrible approach.
Yeah, and then yeah, so those were a couple of confusing ones. So I'm just kind of wondering what's going on here with some of these teams. But again, it's not always fair to automatically judge when we haven't seen any of it yet. So I'll wait on some of these and we'll revisit some of them and see what happens. There were a few other bench signings as well, right? So you did have the Knicks taking Gorshan Yabusele from the Sixers, 2-year, $11 million deal. Solid signing to me because they didn't really have a four at all, really, in their rotation. It was mostly guys that were either, like, say, Towns at the center spot, moving over to the four, or it'd be like Josh Hart or OG Anunoby kind of playing small ball four. But now you have a guy in Yabusele who is a four, right? So I think that can help make some, with some more versatile lineups. He's a good skilled player, big physical guy, right? We saw him in the Olympics, and it's good to see him back in the NBA after playing overseas. They also are supposed to bring in Jordan Clarkson off of waivers because he was bought out from the Utah Jazz. So he's going to join there. If he can still score, still help out offensively, that's a decent signing to round out the bench a little bit. In addition to, they also hired Mike Brown, or they're supposed to hire Mike Brown as their head coach. So we'll see if he's an upgrade from Tibbs. He's supposed to be, at least offensively, from what we saw in Sacramento, an upgrade. Is he that much better than him? No, I don't think so. But at the very least, you did make a couple moves with Yabusele and Clarkson. So I would say those are good bench moves because they didn't have a bench. I still am curious to see defensively how all of this works. at least Yabusele in theory, right, can be another big guy that could help you maybe defensively. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not mad at any of those signings. I think they're great moves in terms of bolstering up the bench, right? Because I think Jordan Clarkson is a direct upgrade over campaign guys like that. But also Yabusele, I think he's better than Precious Achua. So I think there's solid upgrades along the margins, but they definitely need a little bit more for sure if they want to make a legit title run. Like we saw them kind of just flame out a little bit. So I don't know if Mike Brown provides that experience to that team, because I feel like he's from a very odd era of coaching, right? Well, I shouldn't say odd, but it might be a little outdated. Same with Tibbs as well. Like, I just feel like guys like that might be on their way out.
Mhm. Yeah, we'll see if he can make much of a difference because he was just coaching a year ago and then got canned.
Exactly.
For not being able to find a way to make that Kings roster work. So,
Exactly.
we'll see what happens. But either way, then I guess a couple other signings. Brook Lopez to the Clippers at 2 years and 18 million. Right, this was a guy who initially everybody had pegged going to LA, but not the Clippers, the Lakers. But instead, he goes to the Clippers as a backup option. Solid acquisition because stretch big, space the floor, block shots, big physical veteran guy who's been on a championship team, been on other contending teams, well, mostly in Milwaukee, but still. Um, and you got Zubac, right, who's always available, always productive. So you shouldn't have to ask but so much out of Brook Lopez at this point. Like you don't have to rely on him as a heavy minute starter or anything like that. It's another backup that you can have. So when Zubac is off the floor, you're not completely in shambles because you don't have another option at the 5. At least now you got Brook Lopez. So I
Yeah,
think that's a good signing by the Clippers.
for sure. I would agree. Gives you big man depth for sure.
Yeah, so and then just kind of rounded out. Nets re-signed some of their guys. Don't really have to talk much about that. The Sixers were able to bring in Trendon Watford from the Brooklyn Nets, right? Who at times kind of showed some flashes as like kind of like a versatile forward hybrid type of guy, right? So we'll see if he can help provide something there to replace Yabusele. They
Yeah,
re-signed Justin Edwards. Still nothing on Quentin Grimes. We've not heard anything about that. He's still, I guess, a restricted free agent. What's going on there?
I don't know. I'm sure he's looking for somewhat of a payday, right? He had a great season, a great stretch with Philly. Um, so yeah, I would assume that he's looking for some money, and they're just trying to work out the details. But the last time I said that, we literally got Myles Turner going to freaking Milwaukee instead of back to Indiana. So who knows? But I think they've done a good job outside of the Quentin Grimes thing. Hopefully they can retain him.
Yeah. And now there are still some guys, because those are all the signings that we've talked about, and there'll be more moves on the way. Maybe there'll be some trades. Here are some guys that are still hanging on and waiting around for in the free agency list. So you still have Malcolm Brogdon, you still have Mo Wagner. He's got the ACL injury, so I don't know what happens with him. Maybe Orlando brings him back. I don't know. Chris Paul's still out there, right? Reportedly, the Clippers want him, but there was some stuff that came out today that said he wants a starting job. So I don't know if he's going to get that. I mean, I don't. Will he get that in LA if he goes to the Clippers? I guess you'd have to move Norm Powell to the 6-man role, but does he want to do that after
No.
just starting and having a good regular season for them? I don't know. Maybe he still comes there. I have no clue what happens with that, but he's still hanging around. Horford's still hanging around. There's talks about him maybe going to the Warriors. Some people have mentioned the Lakers as well. They've already used their MLE, so they only have their biannual exception. So I think the Warriors can give him slightly more money. It's not much, I think. But either way, maybe he goes to Golden State. Maybe he just retires. I have no clue. Do you have a prediction there?
I mean, maybe LA, but the Warriors would be intriguing. I think they would definitely need an upgrade at the 5. So I would
I guess
definitely
if you're Horford, where would you prefer to go?
either
Would you
Cleveland or Golden State.
Okay.
Yeah, I think those would
There
be
you
my final 2 options for sure. Because I
Yeah,
don't want to
and
be a
then
backup at that point. I kind of want to prove something on a contending team.
at one time, I think Denver was also mentioned, maybe because they got Valanciunas. Maybe that's out. I don't
Yeah,
know.
Yeah.
Would the Lakers be out because they got Ayton? I mean, I guess he could be the backup there, but
Yeah, I would go for the Warriors, honestly. I think that would be
mhm.
best case, best fit.
And then Chris Paul, where do we think he goes?
Could go to the Clippers. I was kind of more on the Phoenix train, but I think the Clippers train would be pretty cool. I wouldn't mind that at all, right? That gives you a good, backup floor general for sure. You don't have to rely on Chris Dunn offensively to kind of command your second unit, right? Like you can rely on Chris Paul, and I think that would be pretty good. Nice, good homecoming.
Yeah, and then Russ, still a free agent. We don't know where he goes. He was supposedly going to go to the Kings, but that fell through because of the Dennis Schroeder sign and trade thing. I think thankfully for the Kings didn't happen. I wouldn't have wanted to dump Malik Monk just to bring in Dennis Schroeder. Well, I
Yeah,
guess you'd swap him, but like,
right.
why? I just don't really
It
see
doesn't
the
really
point in
make
that.
sense. Yeah,
I have no idea where he goes.
yeah.
I mean, you would think maybe he would just go back to Denver, but there were talks about maybe he doesn't go back there. So I have no clue where he
If
goes.
he goes
The
back to
Knicks,
Denver, that would be a good offseason for them.
yeah, the Knicks were also an option as well, but now they said that that probably might be out. Maybe just because they have Clarkson. I don't know.
Yeah.
But where does he go? Like, because I legitimately don't have a guess for that one.
Yeah, I don't think he comes back to Denver just because I feel like that's soured over time. Um, but I don't really have a prediction off the top of my head. That's kind of like a wild card. He could really go anywhere he wants.
Yeah, and then still waiting on the Kaminga sweepstakes. So nothing's happened there. There's been reporting that suggests that he may come back and that, he may just be re-signed or whatever. Of course, there's the other teams that are interested in him. The market's not really that high on him, at least as of right now. Of course, we know it's a weak free agency class and not a lot of teams have cap space anyways. So it may just be more beneficial for him to come back. Are you still kind of holding out thinking that he's going to be moved in the sign and trade or are you kind of moving towards you think he might just come back?
I think he's going to get moved. It's just these things
Okay.
take time. It's a very tricky situation because you do have to agree on a number and then boom, you got to move him as well. So, yeah, I'm still in on him going to Miami.
Okay. And then after that, really none of the other free agents, those are all like minimum contract guys. I mean, I guess guys like D'Anthony Melton, Bol. I mean, we don't really have to mention all those guys, but either way, again, this free agency was not necessarily loaded. Jackson Hayes, I guess, is another free agent guy. Where does he go? I don't know. Back to LA, who knows? But either way, didn't really know what to expect this free agency, but we did get some wild moves because we had the trades in addition to the free agency, and there could be more moves on the way. And then I guess one last thing before we probably end it, Giannis, what do we think?
Um, I mean, it's probably only time will really tell. I think
Yeah,
for
like
that.
does he finish the season a buck? Do we think?
Probably not. I don't think they've done enough so far. But who knows? They might not be done, right? Like if they pull off some crazy move and create some wild package for a superstar, I don't know. I feel like that might entice him to stay. But I feel like their poor handling of the Lillard situation might have completely just thrown everything out of the window. But at the very least, you did get Myles Turner.
Well, that pretty much ends our episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts on your favorite free agency signings, who you thought some winners and losers of free agency were, best signings, dumbest signings. Of course, thanks to everybody who joined us on that last free agency live stream. Pretty much up next, once free agency is done, Summer League is up. That'll be happening. We'll see if we can, find a way to talk about that. Maybe going there. We'll see. Don't want to spoil anything. But either way, obviously, thanks to everybody. And if you follow us on our socials, IG, you can join in on the polls that we put up there. Leave a comment on our shorts or our regular videos. We'll read it at the end. And of course, right, continue to like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Off Ball Takes Podcast. We appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time.